I arrived home earlier than expected, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor echoing in the silence. The house smelled different, lavender and something else, something unfamiliar. My stomach twisted, a strange unease creeping up my spine. I had been married to Daniel for 10 years, and I knew the subtle sense of our home. This wasn't mine. As I placed my purse on the entryway table, muffled laughter floated down the hallway. A woman's laugh. Light teasing. Playful. My pulse quickened. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the narrow opening I saw movement. My fingers curled into fists as I pushed the door open, my heart pounding so loudly I barely heard the startled gasp that followed. There they were. My husband, Daniel, and a woman I didn't recognize, draped in my silk robe, holding a glass of wine as she lounged on my bed. Daniel, shirtless, sat beside her, his arm resting casually around her waist as if this were normal. As if I were the intruder. He didn't flinch. He didn't scramble to explain. He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. Instead, he exhaled, took a slow sip from his own wine glass, and set it down on the nightstand. "You're home early," he said, his voice disturbingly calm. I stood frozen in the doorway, my body trembling with disbelief, anger, and a dawning horror I couldn't yet name. The woman smirked. She tilted her head, lazily tracing the rim of her wine glass with a manicured finger. Her confidence sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through me. "I don't believe we've met," she purred, as if this were a casual dinner party. "I'm Vanessa." I turned to Daniel, my voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell is this?" He leaned back against the headboard, running a hand through his dark hair. "It's exactly what it looks like." His words slammed into me like a physical blow. Exactly what it looks like. No denial. No scrambling for excuses. Just an unbothered, arrogant admission of betrayal. My nails dug into my palms. "In our house. In our bed." Vanessa let out a small, amused laugh. "Oh, sweetheart," she drawled, stretching her legs across the silk sheets like she owned them. "It's not your house anymore." My breath hitched. Daniel finally sat up, grabbing a folder from the nightstand. He flipped it open, pulled out a set of documents, and handed them to me. The words swam before my eyes. My name crossed out. His signature at the bottom. And Vanessa's. "You can't be serious," I choked out. Daniel sighed as if I were an inconvenience. "It's done. The house is in Vanessa's name now." For a moment I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I gripped the papers. "You transferred the house to her?" He nodded. "You'll find all the legal paperwork is in order. You have until tomorrow to collect your things." The world around me blurred. The air in the room felt suffocating, pressing against my chest like an iron weight. I had loved this house. I had built a life here. And in a single stroke of a pen, he had erased me. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the way he looked at me, like I was insignificant. Like I was a problem that had been neatly solved. Vanessa smiled sweetly and raised her glass. "Cheers to new beginnings." Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the nearest object, a framed photo of our wedding day from the nightstand, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, glass raining down onto the floor. Daniel didn't even flinch. He just sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Don't be dramatic, Evelyn." "Dramatic?" I let out a bitter laugh, the sound foreign to my own ears. "You throw me out of my own home, and you expect me to just accept it?" Vanessa shrugged, completely unbothered. "It's not your home anymore." My hands clenched at my sides. I wanted to scream, to fight, to make them hurt the way they had hurt me. But standing there, looking at Daniel, the man I had spent a decade building a life with, I realized something. They expected a breakdown. They wanted tears. They wanted a scene. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I straightened my spine, forcing my breath to steady. "Enjoy it while it lasts," I said, my voice eerily calm. Daniel frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I met his gaze, a slow, knowing smile creeping onto my lips. "You'll find out soon enough." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Just pack your things and go." I took one last look around the room. The walls I had painted. The furniture I had picked. The memories that once made this place a home. It was all gone. But so was the woman who had built this life with Daniel. I turned on my heel and walked out, my steps steady, my heart pounding. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I walked out of that house with my head high, but the second I reached my car, my hands trembled against the steering wheel. My entire world had just crumbled in a matter of minutes. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me. He had erased me. My home, my life, my security, it was all gone. And for her, I couldn't process it. Not fully. My heart was pounding so loudly that it drowned out every rational thought. But beneath the storm of shock and fury, something colder, sharper, was taking shape inside me. This wasn't just about betrayal. Something about the way Daniel had handled everything, so detached, so prepared, made my skin crawl. He hadn't just been caught in the act. He had been waiting for this moment. I pulled out of the driveway, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. I had nowhere to go. No plan, no idea what to do next. But I wasn't going to fall apart. Not yet. Instead of heading to a hotel or calling a friend, I drove aimlessly, my mind racing. Every detail of that encounter replayed in my head, but this time, I focused on what I hadn't noticed before. The way Vanessa smirked as she held that wine glass. The way Daniel had the paperwork already prepared. The way neither of them had looked remotely surprised to see me. I gritted my teeth. They expected this. They planned for it. Something about that realization sent a fresh wave of adrenaline surging through me. If this had been premeditated, then there was more to it than just an affair. I needed answers. And I knew exactly where to start. I pulled into the parking lot of Langston and Company. Legal Services, where Daniel's attorney, our attorney, handled all of our legal affairs. I didn't even know if I had the right to demand answers, but I wasn't leaving without them. The receptionist barely looked up from her computer when I walked in. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I need to see Mr. Langston," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She sighed. "He's in a meeting. I can schedule." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Tell him it's about Daniel Caldwell." Her fingers froze over the keyboard. A slight flicker of hesitation crossed her face before she picked up the phone and murmured something I couldn't hear. 30 seconds later, the door to Langston's office swung open. "Mrs. Caldwell," he greeted me. His expression carefully neutral. "Come in." The way he said my name made my stomach twist. Mrs. Caldwell. But I wasn't Mrs. Caldwell anymore, was I? I stepped into his office, taking a seat before he could even gesture for me to. "I'll get straight to the point," I said, cutting through the formalities. "I want to know when my husband transferred our house to Vanessa." Langston exhaled slowly as he sank into his chair. I was expecting this. That confirmed it. He knew. He had known for a while. I leaned forward, my nails digging into my palms. "How long?" He hesitated, glancing toward the stack of files on his desk. "Legally, I can't disclose private client information." I let out a hollow laugh. "Don't insult me, Mr. Langston. We both know Daniel set this up long before today. I have a right to know when my husband decided to steal my house out from under me." His jaw tightened. For a long moment, I thought he was going to refuse again, but then he sighed and reached for a file. He flipped it open and turned it toward me. My stomach dropped. The deed transfer had been signed 3 months ago. 3 months. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "He planned this before he even told me he wanted a divorce." Langston nodded grimly. "It was structured as a private property transfer. No official sale. Just a direct ownership change." Meaning he had known. All this time. While we were still living under the same roof. While we had shared dinners, conversations, a life. He had already decided I was disposable. I stared at the document, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then something caught my eye. Vanessa's signature. Only, it wasn't just hers. Underneath it, another name was printed in legal script. Gregory Larson. My brow furrowed. Who is this? Langston hesitated. Vanessa's financial attorney. My breath hitched. Why would she need a financial attorney to take ownership of my house? Langston hesitated again, then pulled another document from the file. Because it's not just in her name, he admitted. I scanned the page. My vision swam. The property wasn't solely Vanessa's. It was jointly owned. By Vanessa and a private holding company. My blood ran cold. Why would a holding company be involved? I whispered. Langston rubbed his temples. Because Vanessa didn't just take your house. She bought it, through a shell corporation. The floor beneath me felt like it was tilting. She paid Daniel for it. Langston nodded. Not directly. The company funneled the funds through a third party, making it look like a private transfer. Felt sick. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just betrayal. This was business. Daniel had sold me out. Everything made sense now. Calmness, the confidence, the complete lack of remorse. He hadn't just replaced me with Vanessa. He had profited from it. He had used me, stolen from me, and then tossed me aside without a second thought. I clenched my fists, forcing down the wave of rage burning through my veins. I couldn't afford to break down. Not yet. I needed to be smart. I needed to fight back. I pushed away from the desk and stood. Thank you for your time, Mr. Langston, I said, my voice icy. He hesitated. Evelyn, be careful. I met his gaze. They should be the ones worrying. I turned and walked out, my mind spinning with every possibility. Daniel thought he had won. He thought he had taken everything from me. But he had made one critical mistake. He underestimated me. And I was about to make sure he regretted every single decision he had made. I walked out of Langston's office feeling like I had just stepped off a cliff. The cold evening air hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to ground me. My mind was a battlefield, rage, disbelief, and something even darker twisted inside me. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me. He had orchestrated my downfall with meticulous precision, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. He had sold our home, the one we built together, not in a moment of passion or stupidity, but as part of a calculated plan. And Vanessa, she wasn't just some affair he fell into. She was a co-conspirator, partner in crime. My nails dug into my palms as I leaned against my car, forcing slow, controlled breaths. Losing control wouldn't help me now. Breaking down wouldn't change the fact that I was homeless, discarded like a piece of unwanted furniture. But one thing was clear. Daniel thought he had won. He thought I'd slink away, licking my wounds, too shattered to fight back. He was wrong. I pulled out my phone, my fingers surprisingly steady as I scrolled through my contacts. I knew exactly who to call. 30 minutes later, I was sitting across from Madison in a dimly lit corner of a downtown bar. She was my closest friend, but more importantly, she was the one person I trusted to be ruthless when needed. She took a slow sip of her whiskey, her green eyes locked onto mine. Let me get this straight. Daniel didn't just cheat. He sold your house behind your back, funneled the money through some shady company, and handed the keys to his mistress. Correct. Madison let out a low whistle. That's impressive in a horrifying way. Clenched my jaw. He planned everything. And I let him. I trusted him. Her expression darkened. That's where he screwed up. He thought you'd roll over. I exhaled slowly. Not happening. Madison grinned, the kind of smile that sent shivers down people's spines. Good. So what's the plan? I hesitated, gripping the glass in front of me. I don't just want revenge. My voice was steady, but my heart pounded with something deeper than anger. I want him to feel it. The way I felt it. I want him to lose everything piece by piece, just like he did to me. Madison nodded approvingly. Then we start with information. You don't destroy a man like Daniel by throwing a tantrum. You do it by unraveling him layer by layer. I leaned in, my voice low. I need to know why he did this. The affair I understand. But the property transfer. The shell company. There's more to this. Madison's lips curled. Lucky for you, I know exactly where to start. The next morning, Madison and I sat outside a cafe across from Vanessa's office. The building was sleek, modern, just like the woman herself. She's a financial advisor, Madison murmured, stirring her coffee. Which means she's smart enough to cover her tracks. But she's also arrogant. Women like her. They assume no one's watching. I watched the glass doors, my grip tightening around my cup. She has everything I lost. Madison glanced at me. And soon she'll have nothing. We waited. And then, at exactly 9:47 a.m., Vanessa walked out, perfectly put together in a cream-colored pantsuit, her phone pressed to her ear. I had to fight the instinct to storm over and demand answers. Instead, I followed the plan. Madison stood, adjusting her sunglasses. Time for phase 1. She strolled across the street, her posture confident, calculated. I stayed back, my heart hammering as I watched her approach Vanessa. Vanessa barely glanced at her, until Madison accidentally bumped into her, sending coffee splattering all over her pristine outfit. Vanessa gasped, stumbling back. "Are you serious?" Madison gasped, her voice dripping with fake distress. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. Here, let me." She grabbed a napkin from her bag, dabbing at Vanessa's sleeve while expertly palming the keycard Vanessa had clipped to her bag. Vanessa pushed her away. "Just forget it." She stormed off, muttering curses under her breath. Madison turned back to me, a victorious smirk playing on her lips. She slipped into the cafe, dropping the keycard into my palm. "Step 1, she murmured. Complete. That night, I let myself into Daniel and Vanessa's new home. My home. The smell was different. Vanessa's perfume lingered in the air, clashing against the faint traces of the life I used to have. I clenched my fists as I walked through the rooms, my chest tightening with every step. Framed photos of them were already on the walls. My furniture had been replaced. The house wasn't just mine in memory anymore. It had been completely rewritten to fit them. A slow, burning rage settled in my stomach. I didn't touch anything. I didn't break anything. I just went straight to Daniel's office. And there on his desk was exactly what I was looking for. Stacks of paperwork, bank records, business deals, and at the very bottom an email thread. I sat down, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through the messages. "Daniel, the transfer is finalized. Once the assets are moved to the secondary account, she won't have a legal claim to anything. Vanessa will handle the finances from here. Just ensure she believes the divorce was an organic decision. We don't need a lawsuit." Below it, Daniel's reply. "Understood. Evelyn won't suspect anything until it's too late. She trusts me." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated destruction. Daniel had engineered my downfall, manipulated me, used my trust against me. I took a shaky breath. My heart wasn't just broken anymore. It was gone, burned away, leaving something colder in its place. I pulled out my phone, took photos of every document, every email. Then, slowly, methodically, I closed the laptop, stood up and walked out. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. And Daniel had no idea that the perfect betrayal was about to become his downfall. I stepped out of that house with the weight of truth pressing against my chest. The night air was cool, but my skin burned with the rage coursing through my veins. My fingers curled around my phone, the evidence I had just collected feeling heavier than the device itself. Daniel thought he was untouchable. He believed he had tied every loose end, manipulated every outcome in his favor. But his arrogance was his greatest weakness. He had underestimated me. I wasn't going to break. I was going to unravel him. The next morning I sat in my car, parked outside Madison's apartment, scrolling through the emails for the 100th time. Every message between Daniel and his lawyer, every transaction signed off by Vanessa, it all painted a clear picture of their deception. They had stolen from me. Not just my home but my life. Madison slid into the passenger seat, handing me a coffee. "You look like you didn't sleep." I took a sip, the warmth barely cutting through the numbness in my chest. "I didn't." She glanced at my phone. "So, what's the play?" I exhaled slowly. "We expose him. Publicly. Legally. Completely." Madison smirked. "Now that's the Evelyn I know." She pulled out her laptop, opening multiple windows at once. "First things first. Let's see just how deep this rabbit hole goes." I watched as she sifted through financial records, cross-checking names and numbers. Within minutes, she whistled low. "Oh, Daniel, you greedy little rat." My stomach tightened. "What?" Madison turned the screen toward me. "See this company. The one the house money went through." She pointed at a name I didn't recognize. "It doesn't exist. Not legally anyway. It's a shell corporation." I frowned. "So, it was just a way to move the money without a trace." "Exactly. And guess whose name is on the back end of the transactions?" I leaned in, my pulse quickening. "Vanessa Holloway." My grip on the coffee cup tightened. She wasn't just involved. She orchestrated this. Madison nodded. "And if we can prove it, we're not just talking about fraud. We're talking about a criminal offense." I sat back, my mind spinning. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me. He had aligned himself with someone who specialized in this kind of deception. Someone who likely had done it before. And if Vanessa had done this before? I looked at Madison. What are the odds this isn't her first time? Madison grinned, cracking her knuckles. "Let's find out." The deeper we dug, the worse it got. Madison found 3 other instances where properties had been funneled through Vanessa's fake companies, each time involving a different man. She played the same game, luring them in, manipulating them, and then stripping them of their assets. Daniel wasn't special. He was just her latest mark. The realization sent a strange, bitter satisfaction through me. He thought he had outplayed me, but he had been nothing more than a pawn in Vanessa's bigger game. I stared at the files on the screen, my mind racing. There was no way Daniel knew the full extent of what he had gotten himself into. But he was about to find out. That evening I stood outside our house. No, their house, watching through the large front windows. They were inside, seated at the dining table, drinking wine, laughing. Rage coiled in my stomach, but I didn't move. I wasn't here to scream or demand answers. I was here to set the first domino in motion. I pulled out my phone and hit send. Inside, Daniel's phone buzzed. He picked it up, frowning at the notification. A second later, Vanessa's rang too. She grabbed it, her face instantly paling. Madison had just sent them everything. Every email. Every transaction. Every fraudulent deal Vanessa had ever orchestrated. I could see the tension ripple through the room. Daniel turned to Vanessa, his brows furrowing. He said something, his voice too muffled to hear from where I stood, but Vanessa's reaction was immediate. She slammed her glass down, standing abruptly, shaking her head. The cracks had formed. Daniel was catching on. And he didn't like it. I watched as they argued, the heat between them shifting from passion to distrust. Daniel's face twisted in anger. Vanessa tried to talk him down, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She knew she had lost control. Daniel stormed away from the table, running a hand through his hair. He looked at his phone again, scrolling frantically. His face darkened. That was my cue. I walked up to the front door and knocked. The moment Daniel opened the door, his expression went from fury to shock. "Evelyn," smiled. Surprised. Vanessa appeared behind him, her face a mask of barely concealed anxiety. "What are you doing here?" I tilted my head. I just wanted to see how you two were holding up. You've had quite the evening, haven't you? Daniel clenched his jaw. What the hell did you do? I stepped inside, my heels clicking against the floor. I just made sure the truth got where it needed to go. I glanced at Vanessa. I imagine Daniel isn't too happy learning he's not the mastermind in this little operation. Daniel turned to Vanessa, suspicion clouding his eyes. Is it true? His voice was lower now, dangerous. Vanessa scoffed. Of course not. She's trying to turn you against me. Then explain this. Daniel shoved his phone in her face, scrolling through the records. I trusted you. You said this was clean. Vanessa's mask finally cracked. I did what was necessary. Daniel's expression shifted into something unreadable. You used me. Vanessa folded her arms. You're acting like you didn't do the same thing to her. His jaw tightened, but there was a flicker of realization in his eyes, a crack in his certainty. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. You thought you were the predator, Daniel? You were prey. Just like her. She gestured at me, her voice laced with venom. I crossed my arms, watching the unraveling unfold. Daniel turned to me, his face unreadable. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw it, fear. Not of me, of what was coming next. Smiled. Enjoy the rest of your night. Then I walked out, leaving them to destroy each other from the inside out. The first domino had fallen, and the collapse had only just begun. I stepped into the morning light, inhaling deeply as the crisp air filled my lungs. The world felt different, lighter, as if the weight I had carried for so long had finally begun to lift. Behind me, Daniel and Vanessa's world was collapsing. I had left them standing in the wreckage of their own greed, their betrayal laid bare. But that wasn't enough. Not yet. Justice still had to be served. I checked my phone, scrolling through the messages from Madison. She had been up all night working on the final pieces of our plan, ensuring every document, every damning detail, was in the right hands. The authorities had what they needed. Now it was just a matter of time. By midday the news had spread. Daniel's company stocks plummeted as whispers of financial misconduct circulated among investors. The shell corporations, the fraudulent transactions, it was all unraveling. Madison called, her voice laced with barely contained excitement. Evelyn, you need to see this. She sent a link to a breaking news report. CEO Daniel Holloway under investigation for financial fraud, alleged involvement in property scandal exposed. I stared at the headline, feeling an unexpected mix of emotions. Relief, satisfaction, but also something deeper. Something final. Vanessa wasn't mentioned in the article, but I knew it wouldn't be long before her name surfaced. She had played this game before. Only this time she had lost control. And Daniel, well, he had only ever been a stepping stone in her game. Now he was sinking with her. By evening my phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. I answered cautiously. A familiar voice, laced with desperation, filled the silence. Evelyn. I almost didn't recognize Daniel's voice. It lacked the arrogance, the self-assured smugness that had always defined him. What do you want, Daniel? Kept my tone even. A ragged breath. You did this. I leaned against the counter, watching the city skyline through my window. You did this to yourself. Silence. Then a bitter chuckle. I trusted her. Closed my eyes. And I trusted you. He exhaled sharply. I didn't think she'd turn on me. I thought. He stopped himself. I thought I was in control. I shook my head, though he couldn't see me. You never were. Another long pause. Then quieter, almost a whisper. Are you happy now? I let the question hang between us. Was I happy? Well, but I was free. And that was enough. I didn't respond. I simply ended the call, letting the silence be my answer. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Daniel was officially removed as CEO. His assets were frozen pending the investigation. Investors turned their backs on him, distancing themselves from the scandal. Vanessa, on the other hand, had vanished. Not surprising. She had spent her life slipping out of consequences. This was just another game of survival for her. But this time I had made sure there was no escape. Madison had worked with a journalist to expose Vanessa's past, linking her to the fraudulent deals she had orchestrated over the years. One by one, her victims came forward, ready to testify. The walls were closing in. And then, finally, she was caught. Arrested at the airport, attempting to flee the country under a fake name. When I saw the footage on the news, something inside me settled. It was over. Really, truly over. The courtroom was colder than I expected. I sat in the gallery, watching as Daniel stood before the judge. His once pristine suit looked wrinkled, his face hollow from sleepless nights. He didn't meet my eyes. Vanessa sat beside him, her expression unreadable. For the first time, she wasn't in control. She was just another defendant, waiting to hear her fate. When the guilty verdict was read, neither of them reacted. It was as if they had already known. Madison squeezed my hand. "It's done." I nodded, but my chest felt heavy. Justice had been served, but it didn't erase the past. It didn't give me back the home I had lost. But maybe it didn't need to. Maybe closure wasn't about reclaiming what was taken, but about letting go. Weeks passed. Life moved forward the way it always did. I found myself standing in front of a house. My house. Or at least, the one that used to be mine. It was on the market again. Daniel had been forced to sell it off to cover legal fees. I had no intention of buying it. I wasn't here for the past. I was here to say goodbye. I closed my eyes, remembering the laughter, the warmth, the memories that had once filled these walls. This place had been my home. But I wasn't tied to it anymore. Home wasn't a building. It was the people who stood by you. It was Madison, who had fought beside me when I had no fight left. It was me standing here now, stronger than I had ever been. I turned away, walking back to my car, leaving the past behind me. A new beginning was waiting. And this time it was mine.